A hiker climbing one of Europe's most dangerous volcanoes never saw the storm that killed him. He wasn't caught by lava, ash, or falling rock. He was struck by lightning on the open slopes of Mount Etna, and within hours, an American tourist from Kansas was dead. This tragedy unfolded on Sunday evening, in the middle of one of the most intense eruptive periods Mount Etna has experienced in years. The volcano had already been dominating headlines across Europe for weeks before this happened, with ash plumes grounding flights and lava fountains lighting up the night sky over Sicily. It's a stark reminder that some of the deadliest hazards on an active volcano don't actually come from the volcano itself. Etna has spent weeks proving just how disruptive molten rock and volcanic ash can be to daily life across Sicily. But it was an entirely different kind of danger, one that has nothing to do with magma at all, that ultimately claimed this visitor's life. The 29-year-old man was hiking in an exposed, barren section of the mountain when a severe thunderstorm rolled in with almost no warning, according to Italian officials. He had entered an area that was closed to visitors, apparently trying to get closer to the summit for a better view of the ongoing volcanic activity. He was found in a region known as Rocca Capra, sitting at roughly 1,400 meters in elevation. That's nearly 4,600 feet above sea level, well above the tree line, in terrain that offers essentially zero natural shelter from lightning. Open, rocky, and elevated ground like this is exactly the kind of landscape storm safety experts warn hikers to avoid the moment thunder starts rolling in. Rescue teams reached him by helicopter at around 8 in the evening local time. When they arrived, he was already in a state of cardiac arrest, firefighters and emergency. Crews worked to stabilize him during the flight to Cannizaro Hospital in the nearby city of Catania, but doctors were ultimately unable to revive him. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. His name has not been released by authorities, and Italian investigators have opened an inquiry into exactly what happened in his final hours on the mountain, including whether the restricted area where he was struck was clearly marked or actively enforced at the time. That detail matters enormously for understanding what actually went wrong. If barriers, signage, or personnel were in place and he crossed them deliberately, that tells one story about personal risk-taking on an increasingly popular but genuinely hazardous mountain. If enforcement was weak or inconsistent, that raises very different questions about how well Italian authorities are managing visitor safety during a period of heightened volcanic activity. For now, those specifics remain part of an active investigation. This wasn't an isolated tragedy either. On that same Sunday, a second fatal lightning strike occurred elsewhere in Italy, hundreds of miles to the north. An Italian man was killed while descending Piz Starlex, a mountain in the country's northernmost autonomous province. His body was eventually located at around 2,600 meters with roughly 40 rescuers, and a drone needed to find him in the rugged terrain. Across the country that weekend, Italian rescue services reported more than 250 separate emergency interventions in mountainous regions alone. It was, by their own account, one of the busiest stretches of the summer for mountain rescue teams, a grim reflection of just how many people were out on exposed peaks and ridgelines exactly when severe weather rolled through. A spokesperson for Italy's Alpine and Speleological Rescue Service described the sheer volume of callouts that weekend as proof of just how many technicians were working extended hours, some of them operating deep into the night across multiple regions simultaneously. That single weekend alone offered a stark snapshot of how quickly a normal summer hiking season can turn into a coordinated nationwide emergency response. If you're finding this kind of grounded, source-based coverage useful, go ahead and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this reach more people who care about understanding real events rather than sensationalized headlines. To understand why this specific tragedy happened, you have to understand what makes mountains like Etna such dangerous places for sudden thunderstorms. Italy's Civil Protection Department has repeatedly identified mountain terrain as one of the highest risk environments for lightning strikes anywhere in the country, specifically warning hikers to avoid exposed ridges and open peaks the moment storm clouds start building. The reason comes down to basic physics. Lightning searches for the shortest, easiest path to the ground, and an exposed hiker standing on a barren, elevated slope can become exactly that path if nothing taller happens to be nearby. Add the fact that many hikers are carrying metal trekking poles, cameras, or other conductive gear, and the risk only compounds further. Volcanic terrain like Etna's upper slopes makes this problem even worse. Much of the ground above the tree line is bare volcanic rock, with almost no vegetation, structures, or natural cover of any kind. A hiker caught in that kind of landscape during a storm often has nowhere meaningful to retreat to. No dense tree line, no low valley, nothing but exposed ridgeline in every direction. Etna adds another layer of danger on top of all that. Italian officials have long warned that the mountain's geography creates conditions for extremely sudden weather shifts. Visitors can travel from sea level heat and humidity to genuine high mountain conditions within just a few kilometers of driving. as warm, moisture-laden air coming off the Mediterranean collides with much colder air higher up the slopes. That collision is a textbook recipe for fast-forming, intense thunderstorms, the kind that can build with very little advance warning, even on a day that started out clear and sunny at the base of the volcano. Hikers who check the forecast before starting their ascent can still find themselves caught in a storm that simply wasn't visible or predictable a few hours earlier. What makes this particular death even more sobering is the timing. Mount Etna has been erupting continuously for weeks, through a sequence that began with a flank eruption in the Valle del Bove back on January 1st of this year, followed by sustained explosive activity from the mountain's voragine crater through the middle of the year. That activity intensified dramatically starting in early August, when Strombolian activity at the voragine crater escalated into full lava fountaining, and a brand new eruptive vent opened in the Valle del Bove at an elevation of roughly 2,750 meters. Ash plumes from that activity have repeatedly climbed past 7,000 meters into the sky. Catania's airport, one of Sicily's busiest, has been closed and reopened repeatedly throughout this eruption, in what regional officials have described as the worst disruption the airport has experienced in more than 2 decades. More than a third of scheduled flights were canceled during the worst stretch of the crisis, and roughly 100,000 passengers found themselves stranded or rerouted. Airlines diverted flight after flight to Palermo, Trapani, and other nearby airports, while Italy's national rail operator added extra train services just to help stranded travelers reach Sicily's other cities. Streets in towns closer to the volcano, including Adrano and Regalna, were repeatedly coated in falling ash during the most intense phases of the eruption, forcing residents into their own routine of cleanup between storms. Because of that heightened volcanic activity, Italian authorities had already restricted access to large sections of Etna's upper slopes, particularly areas above the tree line where there's little shelter from either falling volcanic debris or sudden weather. The area near where this hiker was struck by lightning falls within that broader zone of increased restriction and risk. That combination, an active volcano drawing curious tourists closer than official guidance recommends, paired with the kind of sudden mountain thunderstorm this region is known for, created exactly the conditions this tragedy needed to unfold. Etna draws roughly 1.5 million visitors every single year, many of them hoping to catch a glimpse of exactly the kind of dramatic volcanic activity that has made headlines all summer. That number has only grown as this eruption has stretched on. Footage of glowing lava fountains and towering ash columns has circulated widely online for weeks, and for some travelers, that kind of imagery becomes its own draw, an incentive to get as close as possible rather than a warning to keep their distance. Remarkably, the volcano's eruption didn't pause for any of this. Just one day after the hiker's death, Etna erupted again, sending fresh plumes of smoke and ash rocketing into the sky over Sicily, along with what witnesses described as a swirling whirlwind of dust near the volcano's slopes. Life, tourism, and volcanic activity on Etna have continued largely uninterrupted, even in the immediate aftermath of a fatal accident. Aviation authorities downgraded the volcano's aviation alert level from red to orange just one day before this fatal lightning strike, a signal that suggested, at least temporarily, that the most severe phase of the eruptive crisis had begun to ease. But INGV, Italy's Geophysics and Volcanology Institute, was careful to note that downgrade reflected current instrument readings rather than any guarantee against the situation escalating again without warning. That uncertainty captures something important about visiting an active volcano like Etna in the first place. Conditions here can shift rapidly and unpredictably, whether it's the volcano itself ramping back up or a thunderstorm building out of what looked like clear summer skies just an hour earlier. Both hazards demand the same basic response, paying close attention to official guidance and turning back the moment conditions change. Mountain rescue officials across Italy have used this tragic weekend to renew their warnings to hikers and tourists more broadly. Officials have specifically pointed to a pattern they see repeatedly during the busiest tourist months, visitors underestimating how quickly conditions at altitude can turn dangerous, especially after spending the earlier part of their day relaxing at sea level along Sicily's beaches. For anyone planning to hike an active volcano like Etna or any exposed high-altitude terrain, safety officials consistently emphasize the same core guidance. Check the forecast immediately before setting out, not the night before. Turn back the moment you hear thunder, well before rain or visible lightning ever arrives. And never enter areas marked as restricted or closed, regardless of how tempting a closer view of an active eruption might seem in the moment. Mountain guides who lead excursions on Etna have echoed those same warnings for years, pointing out that the mountain's popularity, combined with its genuinely unpredictable conditions, is exactly what makes complacency so dangerous. A slope that looks calm and scenic in the morning can become life-threatening within the space of a single afternoon, and no amount of prior experience on the mountain fully removes that risk. Even seasoned local guides say they've had to turn back groups on short notice more than once this summer simply because the sky changed faster than anyone expected. Subscribe so you don't miss the next major story the moment it develops, because from Pacific typhoons to Hawaiian volcanoes to a Mediterranean mountain claiming lives in a single stormy weekend, this has become on E of the most eventful stretches of natural hazard news in recent memory. For now, investigators in Sicily continue piecing together the final details of exactly what happened on Etna's slopes that Sunday evening. What's already painfully clear is that a mountain already commanding global attention for its volcanic fury found a second, entirely different way to prove just how unforgiving its terrain can be, striking down a visitor not with fire from below, but with lightning from the sky above. And as Etna's eruption continues without any sign of slowing, that same landscape will keep drawing curious travelers back toward its slopes long after this particular storm has passed.